So after I made my worst HF sets video, I fully intended to make a best or favorite list video. I mean, I could see it right now. Top 9 best Hero Factory sets that aren't Witch Doctor, because Witch Doctor is so much better than everything else. Everything else is a distant second place.
I mean, that just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it?
But part of me also really wants to redo that video, just because it isn't very good. Apart from the fact I edited that video using Microsoft Photos, which gave it this hideous purple filter, the commentary is also pretty bad.
Gobblade is just such a nothing set.
So why not knock out 2 birds with 1 stone and talk about all the sets? And putting them all in a list by comparing them to each other. Using that one format that was originally made for fighting games that the internet has just kind of appropriated for everything. Yes, this is the LEGO Hero Factory Complete Tier List. Or an 85 set mega review.
Alright, and I did kind of a bad job explaining my criteria in my original draft, so let me try it again. So the first thing that I'm going to be judging these figures on is their overall appearance, because I like toys that look cool. And I don't really like things like big hollow gaps or Technic pieces that break visual cohesion or color scheme. Number 2, the build. These things being LEGO sets, putting them together is like half the fun. And I'm definitely going to prefer a unique build over the same copy-paste build that over half the series uses. With that being said, I'm not going to prioritize unique builds over generic builds. Just because something is unique doesn't make it better than something that already works just fine. Number 3, price. Or bang for your buck, as many toy channels call this. Basically, I'm going to take into account that the more expensive figures should be better than the cheaper figures. However, when I bring up the original prices, I want you guys to keep in mind we've gone through a decade of inflation. Let me use some other toy robots to kind of demonstrate this point. This is Transformers Animated Deluxe Class Bumblebee, the Elite Guard variation, which is just like a slightly tweaked version of the original. They sold for the same price, and I think it's a pretty good figure. And in the United States in 2008, it retailed for $10. And here is Deluxe Class Earthspark Bumblebee, which is also a pretty good figure. It's noticeably lighter than the other figure, and this released for $20 US. And yes, I could have brought this thing out, which is also $20, but that's more it's small because animated Bumblebee is supposed to be tiny. I'll also be using brickeconomy.com for a pricing guide, so if I say something wrong, it's Brick Economy's fault, not mine. And finally, I'll be judging these based on how the instructions say that these sets are built and not a bunch of simple modifications I could make, because yeah, I know a thing or two about Hero Factory mods. As for things that I'm not going to consider, number 1, parts for mock making, because I'm judging these sets as complete figures. I'm not judging them as parts kits. I'm not going to put something in a higher tier because it's got a cool little part that I can use if I disassemble the set, because that's not what I'm judging. Number 2, lineage, and this is really specifically for the heroes, but I'm not going to call something bad because one of the characters changed their helmet or color scheme in between waves. Number 3, loose minifigures. This is about the jumpers and mini heroes, and they're not going to affect the set placement, both because they're not the main appeal of the set and because I don't want to hunt down all the eye colors and accessories for all the loose minifigures to show them off. And number 4, these launchers, because they are really an inoffensive play gimmick that like half these sets use, so why bother pointing them out? And finally, I'm not giving pity points to older sets. I will be judging them all by the same standard. Also,
If you're the type of person to get very upset that a man in his mid-20s is nitpicking 10-plus-year-old toys meant for children in between the ages of 6 and 14, then maybe you should just watch a different video, man.
So, without any further delay and my arbitrary subjective standards thrown out there into the wild for people to yell at me about anyway, let's go ahead and start this list off the way you would naturally expect, with the 2.0s.
Okay, so the reason I'm starting this off with the 2.0s is because I feel like they set a very good baseline standard for what an average set is. Not only are they the first CCBS sets, but they're more than likely the first CCBS sets that anyone watching has owned, myself included. And I think they do a very good job of showing off the strengths and weaknesses of Hero Factory as a line. Starting off with the pros, their posability is amazing. I think these guys are a fantastic first draft for the CCBS system. Not only do their limbs have a very impressive bend, but their balance is also great. I understand a lot of people don't like the CCBS feet, but it's hard to deny that they do a very good job at being feet. I also really love how these guys showcase the versatility of customization with this system. They're all essentially the same figure, but looking at them at a glance, they don't really look like it. They have distinct features, different armor variations, different sizes, different weapons. Hell, I remember being a kid and really loving this headgear system because it allowed for so much more customizability with more characters with unique identities. But with all that being said, these guys aren't perfect. The biggest issue they have is the fact their backs are just completely open. Looking at these figures from the back kind of makes them look like sticks with a bunch of hollow armor placed on, because that's basically what they are. Another issue that affects most of these guys is the fact that they only have one hand, which is just kinda lame. Like, a big selling point of CCBS is that it was way more durable than what came before. So it's just kinda lame that you can't put your heroes in a civilian mode and they're stuck with a weapon on their hand. Like, even if LEGO didn't want to do the wrist-mounted weapons that they were doing in the show, they very easily could have just included a spare hand as a loose part or something. Another issue a couple of them have is that their weapon arm just doesn't have armor, which looks weird when you look at it from certain angles because it doesn't look like an arm, it looks like a black tube with a weapon attached. Still, I think these figures hold up pretty decently after CCBS has been discontinued. For $8 each, you get a very posable figure that looks good from a lot of angles and is fun to play with. These guys fit very comfortably into B tier.
And next up, we'll go ahead and get the 1.0s out of the way. If you saw my worst Hero Factory sets video, then you'll know that I do not like these guys at all, and my opinion really has not changed in the last 2 years. I have 3 major problems with these sets. The first one, and this is probably going to be more subjective and contentious, but their limbs are just pre-bent static pieces, and that just sucks so much for an action figure. It can't move. The only poses you can get with these guys is either stoically standing there or shooting at something. But even if you want them shooting at something, half of them look terrible while doing it, because some genius over at LEGO decided to give them these ugly hollow weapon arms that just look terrible. And the most infuriating part about this is that these weapon arms almost fit over the regular arms. They just had to adjust the angle a little bit, and you could just put it on a regular arm. It would be filled in. It wouldn't look so terrible. And these limbs are only used on these sets. I mean, they have these axles on the side, and no set that uses this piece uses them. And you know what? Speaking of those unique limbs, I assume the same genius behind this brilliant design was also the same genius that was like, hey, you know those Ben 10 figures? You know how we remade the socket joints for those? And how 4 Hero Factory sets use those exact pieces? Yeah, how about instead of using those socket joints, we just go back to the very breakable 2008 joints. And before someone feels the need to point out my retail price rule, you know what I could take that money and buy? Not a Hero Factory set. Genuinely the nicest thing I can say about these things, and it is a compliment, is that they at least make for a good shelf or desk decoration.
And I also do think they are better than the Stars, Agori, and Ovtorin.
But man, these things are so bad, I don't think they are a fair gatekeeper of the F tier. These things are so much worse than everything else. If I put these guys in F tier, then nothing else would be allowed to be in F tier by default. So these guys get their own tier below F tier.
Okay, whatever, I'm done talking about that garbage, so let me go ahead and just change the topic to something much cooler, like explosions!
So yeah, we'll just start the list with Explode, because he was the first of the $13 sets to be shown off in the show. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and start with things I like, because there are plenty of things I like about this set. For example, I really like his color scheme.
Black and bright red is just kind of a tried and true color scheme, but the way this kind of yellow on the tips of the spikes and the weapon kind of stand out looks really cool. I also really like this kind of backpack that uses up what would have been an exposed ball joint. I think it just kind of gives a little extra polish to this set that a couple of the other ones don't have. Unfortunately, this thing isn't perfect. It's got some major issues. For example, uses 08 sockets, which are terrible.
And kind of a weird, unique feature with Explode is that he's the only one of the 2010 villains to have posable elbows. But for whatever reason, LEGO decided to use this Toamata piece that has a 90-degree bend in it, and it's just so awkward to pose.
And a couple more minor issues. There's these open axles on the arms, which just look kind of weird. And you can kind of see the details of the Glatorian head through the mouth of his face, which just kind of looks weird. But still, like, my complaints towards this thing compared to what I like about it are pretty minimal, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw Explode in the A tier. I think he's a pretty good set. Next up, we have Corroder. Of course, starting off with the things I like. When he's on all fours, he looks pretty cool. He definitely looks like some type of a weird, aggressive alien. The box advertises how easily you can get him to hang on stuff with only one of his claws, and yeah, it's pretty easy to do. You can get him to hang on a light, a shelf, a table. Really no problem at all. And with how big these weapons are, the balance is also pretty good as well. But unfortunately, that's really where my praise for this thing ends, because this thing just has a lot of issues that I don't like. The arms use these pre-bent static pieces that are locked at a 90-degree angle, so they have no posability. The weapons feature stickers, which just is very inconvenient because it's very easy to screw up putting them on, and it takes a little extra effort to clean the set with stickers because you gotta remove the part and very delicately clean it up. You can't just dip it in water like everything else. I really don't like this shoulder cannon. Its placement clashes with the main hand weapon a lot, and it's just kind of unnecessary. It feels like it's only here because the villains all needed to have this weapon for some reason. And the body is very bare. Like, I think LEGO should have just left the shoulder cannon out and instead given us torso armor. Because all he has on this torso is some color scheme breaking gray, and something that really doesn't help is the fact that they put a red dot in his groin, which just looks awkward as hell. I don't think Corroder is an awful set, but I don't think he's very good either. So he fits right into the below average C tier. Alright, next up we have Meltdown. Of course, starting off with the things I like, while I did praise Explode for being the only one of these sets to have elbows, the way Meltdown's arm is constructed kind of gives him like these pseudo elbows, so I guess he gets a pass in this regard. I really like the way this red eye pops out against the black, yellow, and green. Again, I really love how alien these figures look. I also really like the way these tubes kind of connect to these containers and weapons. And I also really like that the kind of fluid in the tube is a pretty close color to the tentacle and the Zamosphere. The color isn't perfect, but it kind of gives the illusion that he's carrying around toxic radiation to power up his weapons. Unfortunately, not perfect, like everything. Of course, there's the obvious 08 sockets in the feet, head, and arms. And he's got stickers. The tanks are actually supposed to have stickers on them, but mine have just kind of worn off, and I don't really want to take the tanks off of my revamp just to show this off because I don't care that much. Something that really does stand out in a bad way is that open ball joint on top of his torso. I mean, it kind of makes him look like this is not his head, but instead this is a decapitated person and this is just a weird chest accessory. The upper arms have a certain bareness and skinniness to them that just looks very unfinished. I kind of wish they included some armor to cover that up, or just make this piece of Ben 10 limb and put the tanks on these unused axle holes on the shoulders. And finally, for a small nitpick, I don't like how this weapon kind of swings around, because there are many ways they could have made it not do that. Still, Meltdown's just an overall dope, cool set, so I really can't put him anywhere below A tier. And finally, for the $13 sets, we have Thunder. Now, something I do like about this set is his very greebly and messy look. Kind of gives him more of a mechanical look compared to the others' more alien look, and it definitely helps him stick out. But unfortunately, that's pretty much where all my praise for this set ends, because this is easily the weakest of the four. His main weapon, this Crushing Claw, is just awkward as hell to work with. I mean, I would have liked to see it in the show, but apparently Threshold really didn't. Something else that really doesn't help is just the fact that black, silver, and gray is a very bland color scheme. Sure, it's got little bits of yellow, but all of those are stickers. And the legs are just completely black with no color to them until you get to the foot. And he's got the same launcher and ball joint on top of the torso issues that Meltdown has. Thunder joins Corroder in C tier. Alright, moving up to the $20 price tier, let's talk about Rotor. Now, right off the bat, something I will praise is that he is a good amount taller than the $13 villains. And he definitely looks like a multi-man job for the little heroes to take down. The posability is also pretty respectable for a figure this size. With my only real nitpick being that if you bend the knee too far, then his ankles can't really sag down. Which is what you'd want for a character that's supposed to be flying, but honestly, that's not really that big of a criticism. Something I will criticize the legs for, however, is just how much of a mess they are. Not only are they filled with a bunch of color scheme breaking bits, but there's also this very noticeable gap in the upper leg that could have easily been covered with some lift arms. And also just this open axle on the side. But back to the positives, of course a set named Rotor that has a helicopter blade on his back obviously can have the helicopter blade spin, and it does spin pretty well. The only real issue being one of these tubes on the arm kind of get caught on it, especially if you move it forward. But you know, I do appreciate that you can move it forward. Definitely helps him look more dynamic and adds to the overall playability. However, the Rotor does have two fairly minor problems. I'm not a big fan of the way the base looks from the front of the figure. Like, it just looks like more was meant to be done with it, but they just didn't have the time or budget to finish making it. And then when you turn it around, there are a bunch of open pins just there.
and adding a lift arm to this wouldn't stop it from working, so I don't know why they didn't just include a lift arm to cover that up. Moving on to the arms, and honestly, they're probably the weakest part of the set. Compared to how bulky everything else, the arms just look extremely skinny by comparison, and the space in between the elbow and the weapon is just super open and exposed. It's like he doesn't have any forearm, and it just translates from arm to weapon. And you might think that this is an unfair criticism, but you know who would disagree? Threshold, because they fixed it in the show. Another slight problem I have with this set is the helmet. Its eyes are completely filled in, so that transparent head underneath can't really provide any light piping. I mean, I don't think it makes the set bad, I just think it's kinda lame. And honestly, I really like this set. If the arms were a little bulkier, then he probably would be S tier, but skinny arms, you get to sit down in A tier. Alright, next up we have the main bad of this wave, Von Nebula. Now right off the bat, this is a very striking and cool looking figure. It definitely has that final boss kind of feel to it, which I think for a theme as goofy as Hero Factory is very important. I think LEGO did a pretty good job keeping as much of the figure as possible just consistently black. And while this figure does have a good chunk of gray, it's really not that intrusive. Something I do like, and I don't know if it's intentional or not, but there's actually some subtle blue technique that kind of goes in with the staff and the spiky armor. However, there are two pretty notable flaws with this figure. The first one being that there are just a strangely high amount of open axles. Like, LEGO didn't want to use axles that wouldn't protrude out of the figure for some reason. But more importantly are these arms.
My arms are spiky but refuse to bend. Although the other villains have the same trend, cause LEGO's lame.
I think for a $20 figure, these arms are just unacceptable. With the other villains in the wave, with the exception of Corroder, you could at least make the argument that they're just carrying weapons so big it covers their entire forearm, but that's not the case here. If the set looked like this, he would probably be S tier, honestly. But unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world, so I gotta drop him down to A tier. Alright, moving on to the vehicles that released in 2010, we'll start off with the Ferno bike. The bike itself has grown on me within the last 2 years. I mean, it's just a very cool, sleek looking design that looks like it was ripped out of some, like, anime or something. But the Ferno figure included is weird because for whatever reason, LEGO decided to make his limbs red. But hey, if you're like me and don't like this Ferno, you could always just swap him out with the regular set version. Yeah, his feet don't connect to the side of the bike, but it works fine enough, I guess. Although, like, the only problem with this is there's really nowhere to put his weapon. But let's just take Ferno off the bike and actually look at the bike itself. Overall, I think it's a pretty good-looking vehicle, but I do have two gripes with it. The first one is kind of minor, but the center of the bike is hollow and from many angles looks hollow. But the more serious gripe I have with this vehicle is that the steering isn't connected to the handlebars. Now, I'm someone that has built multiple motorcycles in this scale, both official and custom, and this is not a hard thing to accomplish. Still, this is a pretty good looking set. $30 might be a little steep for it, but you know what? I think it's good enough to go in A tier. And for the other vehicle that released this year, we have the Dropship. Now, this thing is cool, it's big, it's got laser guns, it's got a big cannon, it's got lights. Not actual working lights, but they're supposed to be lights. It's got a lot of engines. It's got its own original character pilot that I have decided is named Sky Blue. But if you don't like Sky Blue, you of course can put other figures in the cockpit, although it's a little more awkward. It's got a weird sexy robot woman on it for some reason. Unfortunately, those aren't the only stickers on it, and I'm not a big fan of how gappy this section right here is. But you know what? All that doesn't matter.
This thing has probably the coolest play feature in the entire Hero Factory series, and that is its drop pod mechanic. This thing is made to latch on to the containers on the 1.0s, 2.0s, and 3.0s, and, well, drop them because it's the drop ship. This thing is not show accurate in the slightest, but I don't care. For $50, this thing is a premium price, and definitely a premium set. Easy S tier. And finally, rounding off 2010, we have Hero Factory's only limited edition set, Bulk vs. Vapor. Now, unfortunately, with Bulk, there's really no value to this thing at all. It's everything wrong with the 1.0s again, except now, instead of having one weapon arm, he has two weapon arms. Maybe I'd be a little more lenient if Stringer's weapon was redone in silver, so there's at least something cool about this, but his scarf and jetpack really don't add that much value. But at least Vapor's a pretty decent figure. I really like the way the orange kind of pops against the black and blue, and I really like his weapons. I mean, I do have a slight issue with them, and that is these pins are going to lose friction over time and just kind of be awkward to work with. But the main appeal of this set is of course going to be its exclusive parts, which he has 3 of. He has 2 of these corroder claws in blue and a rotor mask in blue. I mean, he's not perfect. He's got the same problems that the other villains have, like the lack of elbow articulation and this weird ball joint on top of the head, but if this guy was sold by himself for $13, he'd probably be B tier, maybe even A tier. But that's not the case. Vapor is not sold by himself for $13. Vapor is sold with garbage for $25. And the reason this stings is because you could get a better hero and a just as good villain for $21. You could get a really good villain for $20. You could get 2 of the smaller villains for $26. The only thing that really gives this set value is that limited edition sticker just plastered on the box. The only reason you would want to buy this back when it came out is FOMO. And I think with that in mind, that really hurts this set's rating in the tier list. I'm going to put it in C tier because I think Vapor is at least good enough to keep it out of F tier. Alright, now it's time to return to Ordeal of Fire, and we'll start off with what was actually my first Hero Factory villain set, Drill Dozer. And this might just be the nostalgia talking, but I think this is a really good set. I mean, I think it looks awesome, it's got pretty decent playability, and it's got a lot of personality. I really love his kind of nightmare-ish face and horns. And I also like his very unique body armor. And this shoulder armor is exclusive to this set. It was never seen again, which is kind of a shame because I think it's a really cool piece. But regardless of the fact that this thing actually manages to use those ball joints on the CCBS torsos, LEGO also just decided to give him a shoulder cannon, and it's pretty good. I mean, it could be better, but it could also be worse. He's got a weird hook hand, which doesn't make any sense, but hey, it looks cool. My only real complaint is that the drill arm is kind of skinny, and I feel like for a set called Drill Dozer, you gotta make the drill part actually cool. My issue is when the engine part of the arm isn't facing you, the arm looks like it's missing a massive piece of construction. I mean, this set also features an unnecessary arm support, but unlike a certain other set that I'll get to later, it's not really that intrusive. It's designed in a way that even if the support reaches its limit, it's going to break the support itself and not the arm, unlike that other guy, which I'll get to when I get to. But overall, for $13, Drill Dozer is a pretty cool set and definitely deserving of the A tier. Next up, we have Jetbug. And Jetbug is pretty much just one of the 2.0s, except bigger and with a jetpack. Which is not a bad thing in the slightest, because the 2.0 design is a good design. And if you compare him directly with a 2.0, he definitely does feel like he's worth the price increase.
I mean, thanks to the fact he has a jetpack, he actually doesn't have the open back of the torso issue that all the 2.0s have. I do like how spiky he is. Like, it was obviously done to increase the parts count, so people would actually buy this thing for $13, but it definitely gives him a very unique look. I also really like the way the head looks with the mandibles. Just gives him a very unique look and gives him some personality. But I think the most striking feature of this set is its transparent armor. But there is kind of a weird variation issue that this set has. All of these socket pieces are 2008 socket pieces for some reason. And this isn't an issue with all of them, but I have yet to actually see a review from back in the day when this set came out, with the set actually having the proper joints. According to Bricklink, there are variations of the set that did come with the proper joints, but I haven't seen any proof of that, and it's just a weird thing. I'm not going to dock points for it, but it's just weird. Another problem I have with this set is that it just really doesn't have any bug-like qualities apart from the head. And I know that's a bit of a nitpick, but the set's called Jet Bug. I don't know. My overall verdict is that it's definitely a decent value for what you get, but I don't think it's a good enough value to put it above average, so it sits in B tier. And finally, for the $13 Ordeal of Fire sets, we have Nitro Blast. And I'll be honest, I think this guy is easily the worst of the three $13 sets. But there is stuff I like. I definitely like his kind of mad scientist look. I also really like seeing this Meltdown tank again, but this time in transparent orange. And I also really like these spikes attached to it. Actually, I like all the spikes on the set. I think they definitely help give them a more unique look, especially because this guy's main color is red. Something I actually did forget to mention with the other two is that there are only two head molds shared across all four of these villains, which leaves this weird face on the back of their heads, but Nitro Blast doesn't really have this issue because Jetbug's face is pretty featureless. But that's kind of where my praise for this thing ends, because I don't think this thing was very well executed. And most of my problems with this set lie with this giant arm. Okay, now giving a member of a crew called the Fire Villains a giant flamethrower as a weapon makes perfect sense. And when the arm is posed like this, it actually looks pretty good because it's hiding everything wrong with it. The bones making up the arm do not align at all and are just awkward as hell to move. And you can kind of see it now, but whenever I try to move the arm, the Technic on the back just kind of starts to flex. And the back of the figure is left completely open, which, you know, for figures with black torso armor is not really that big of a deal, because the parts that make it look not good are obscured in shadow, but then LEGO decided to give him a red torso, so never mind. And also just kind of a minor nitpick, but this pin here that they connect the hose to is blue when they are very commonly found in gray, and there's enough gray to make it like look not weird, so it's a little frustrating that they did that. I don't think Nitro Blast is a bad figure, but I don't think he's a very good one either. The main draw is the flamethrower, but this is literally the same assembly found on all the other fire villains, so I can't really give it praise for that. I mean, they gave him a launcher and didn't attach that launcher to the flamethrower. Like, that's like the most basic thing they could have done. Nitro Blast finds himself sitting comfortably in the C tier. And last, and certainly least, is Firelord. I have made it no secret that I really do not like this set, but before I get into why I think it's a terrible set, let me at least give it its warranted praise, because this isn't the worst set ever. I mean, starting off, this set is 10 inches tall, which is pretty respectable for a $20 figure. He is noticeably taller than last year's Von Nebula, and he's also got really good balance for a figure this tall. Something else I will praise is, for the most part, he has a pretty good color scheme for a character called Firelord, with a combination of black, gunmetal, silver,
and little bits of orange, yellow, and red. I especially love this kind of lava cracked armor. I do also really like the reuse of this Ferno sword as a primary weapon. And I also really like these kind of pauldrons that can just kind of move and turn into a jetpack. I think it adds a lot of character to him, and it adds a lot of play value as well. I want really bad to like this set, but it just has two massive problems that a $20 figure just should not have. My first issue are these legs because they just look flat out terrible. They're super skinny at the hips, and then when you go down to like in the middle of the thigh, then they start to expand into the knee. It just looks super weird and awkward. Not to mention these blue and tan polka dots that could have easily been covered with a 1x2 plate. But below that, you're also just stuck with a structure you can just see right through. There is a good reason that pretty much every official piece of art of this set covers the legs. They look awful. But what truly makes this a bad set is its arm support. The support itself barely has any movement whatsoever. So if you want to move the arms, you gotta fiddle around with it a little bit. And they also extremely limit the posability, because if you try to put his arms into even a relaxed hands-on-hip stance, the arms just break off because the supports don't let them go back that far. And yes, I could remove the arm supports, but the issue is I still paid for them, and that's not how the set's supposed to go together. I'm judging this as a complete product. I'm not judging this as a product that I could just easily modify. I really wish instead of this figure we got this prototype, because it looks like it wouldn't have had the same issue. But I think what really makes this set sting a lot more is that Ordeal of Fire is a really good wave and an excellent showcase of CCBS for its first run ever. So it kind of just sucks that the main crown jewel isn't good. So with all that being said, Fire Lord goes into the F tier. Alright, now it's time to finally move on to Savage Planet, starting of course with the 3.0 heroes. Now this isn't going to be as in-depth as the 2.0s because frankly pretty much everything I praised and didn't like about the 2.0s also applies here, so I'm just going to show a couple examples of general things that have changed. Starting with the obvious, they're all animals now. I really like how Stormer and Stringer are bulkier than the rest, because when you look at the real-life equivalents to these animals, yeah, a bear and a rhino is going to be bulkier than the wolf, or the tiger, or the lion, or the eagle. Something else I really like is how all the weapons have been changed from blasters to melee weapons. Not only does it really help distinguish them from the 2.0s, but in the context of the story, it makes sense for them to have melee weapons because that lowers the risk of collateral damage. I think it's a nice subtle bit of storytelling. Or at least it would be if this little aspect wasn't blatantly ignored.
Oh, who needs bug repellent when you have a plasma gun?
Something else that was changed in the 3.0s is now all of the lower limbs are gray. Which, I mean, all of them incorporate a similar shade of silver into their color scheme, with the exception of Stringer, so he's the only one that doesn't really look good with this, but it's really not that big of a deal. It's hard to notice. Unfortunately, something that is a little easier to notice, and I forgot to mention this with the 2.0s, but they all have these nameplates. They're printed pieces of armor that go with the color schemes, but on the 3.0s, instead of having them integrated into the color scheme, they're all transparent green, and it doesn't look good on any of them with the exception of Nex, because he has green incorporated in his color scheme. But overall, I'd say these guys are a decent successor to the 2.0s, and it's really subjective which of them you like more. Personally, I like the 2.0s more, but either way, all these guys fit comfortably next to the 2.0s in B tier. Alright, moving on to the $13 villains. We only have 3 of them this time around, but we're going to start with Waspix. Now, right off the bat, I am a fan of how much it does look like an insect. Having 6 limbs is pretty important, and I really like the way that the upper limbs look with those exposed ball joints, because it kind of gives it more of an well, insect look. I also really like the way this printed armor on the arms and head look. I also think these arm blades look cool. I think they're just like a really cool looking melee weapon. And it kind of has a certain savagery look that works for, well, a wild animal. However, I do have some things to complain about, most notably the wings, because I just don't think they really work as wings. Like, if I wasn't told explicitly that these were wings and I didn't see them as wings in action, then I would not assume that these are wings. I mean, I think the quasi spikes really kind of hurt it in this regard. Another strange problem this thing has is that the stinger has just this open ball joint on the back of it. Like, instead of just using a smaller bone that would use less plastic, they just use this big one that limits articulation and looks weird. I mean, at least with this design, you can still push the stinger in front of the body, because I think that's important for a wasp to do. And that's like the main reason I'm terrified of these animals. And finally, the feet use 2008 joints, which is just annoying. I'd say overall, Waspix is a pretty solid set. I mean, overall, it's just one of the 3.0s with an extra joint in the leg, a stinger, a couple wings tacked on the back, and an extra set of arms. It definitely feels like a bigger version of the 3.0, so I will put it in with the 3.0s in B tier. Next up, we have Raja. Now, something that just kind of strikes me about this guy right off the bat is just how expressive he looks. The way the jaw and arms can move around really add a lot of character to this guy. And I absolutely love the way that the armor inside the head kind of looks like eyes. However, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because they do kind of look dead and soulless, but Quattros is a techno-organic plant, so maybe he's just got silver eyes and black pupils. I also really like that pretty much no matter how you pose him, he'll pretty much have his knuckles either on the ground or really close to the ground. It gives him a really gorilla-like look. The jaw itself, I'm a little more mixed on. I mean, the way that the jaw is a different color from the rest of the head just kind of looks less convincing as an animal. Starting the figure over to a side, and I'm not a big fan of this gap in the torso, and really I'm also not too keen on this tail either. I don't think it looks very good, and I don't think it's really necessary at all either. Personally, I would rather they took the parts that they would use on the tail and cover up this ball joint on the torso. But, I mean, really, other than that, I think Raja is a pretty cool, cute, neat little set. Honestly, I don't see any reason to not put this guy in A tier. I like him quite a bit. And finally, for the $13 sets, we have Fangs. Now, we'll start off with something that I do kind of like about this set, and that is the way that these three spikes look on the back. However, its construction leaves a lot to be desired. Looking at the top half of the body, it doesn't really look like it's a part of the body. It looks like it was attached after the fact. And the only thing here that's not supposed to be the natural creature itself are the spikes on top. I really like the transparent armor on here, however, I think their printing and texture looks just kind of random for what's essentially supposed to be a wolf. Moving on over to the head, I'm not really a big fan of these weird buck teeth he has. It makes him look like a savage squirrel. I mean, it's called Fangs and he doesn't really have fangs. I also don't like this just kind of open ball joint in his mouth. It just looks weird. And these spears attached to his face are also just very random and weird. These ones are the regular plastic, but the set came with the rubber ones. And to top it off, he has 08 feet. I am really struggling to say more about this thing. I just don't think it's a very good set at all. And it's a shame because I really liked the other two, but Fangs is just kind of a crappy set. I don't really think he's F tier worthy, but definitely C tier worthy. Moving up to the $25 tier, and we'll start with Scorpio. Now, right off the bat, I will immediately praise this set for its construction. It's cool, interesting, and fun to put together. I also like how each set of legs is different from the others. Black, red, and green is also a pretty good color scheme to work with. However, the body does have one pretty major issue on the side, and that is this large gap in the second set of legs. It's very easy to notice, and in my opinion just looks flat out bad. And there's not really a whole lot that can be done to cover it up within the set itself. You can try to lower the legs down, but it doesn't really work that well. But you know, since I'm already nitpicking, I don't think this really works as a Scorpion toy that much, because it's lacking pinchers on the hands, which is like the second most defining trait of a Scorpion. And the tail doesn't even reach the front of the head either. But on the other hand, this is also just a long bug that runs around and shoots people, so I can't really get that angry. Honestly, if this set was around $15, it'd probably be S tier. $20, A tier, but $25? That's asking a bit much for what's honestly just a walking tank. Still, I think Scorpio is good enough to warrant being in B tier. And to wrap up the $25 sets, we have Raka XL, the first XL hero. Now this guy is a modified Firelord design, and he's a marginal improvement. Starting off with the thing that I think improved the most from the Firelord design, and that is they added some armor to the upper legs, which makes them look a lot less naked. They look so much better. Disappointingly though, the arms on the other hand are basically the same. Their core construction is different, but they have the exact same issues and move in pretty much the exact same way. So that really sucks and knocks the set down a few more tiers. I'm also really not that big of a fan of how messy the top of the figure is. They're just a bunch of random silver spikes protruding everywhere, and they're just kind of meant to just kind of sit there.
And yeah, that's more of a me thing. However, I do think the design should be simpler given the fact Julius Nex
was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
And a little annoying trait about this piece of armor here is that if it's not moved properly and you move the arm, then you risk scratching the printing on the armor, which just kind of sucks. I do really like this massive claw, but I don't really like his other arm. I kind of wish we just got the claw mirrored and just had two claws. That would be cool. Another issue the set has is this piece of armor on the torso. There's really nothing holding it down, so it just kind of wiggles around. So with Raka XL, if they just stripped away some of this stuff and sold them for $20, you could probably be A tier, B tier, but $25 and still bad arms? Yeah, this thing's going into C tier. And now to wrap up Savage Planet, we have LEGO's best construction figure, better than Bionicle, better than Marvel, better than Star Wars, better than DC, better than Bionicle again. I love this thing a lot. Witch Doctor. Hyperbole and rage bait aside, I do genuinely believe this is easily the best figure in Hero Factory, just hands down, with the only real runner-ups being the two good vehicle sets. Starting off with his sheer size, from foot to head he is 12 inches tall, which is really impressive. And if you want to count the big spikes on his back, he's actually 14 inches tall, which is taller than Toamata Nui. And if you don't want to count the spikes on his back, his size easily matches other Titans around the same price, such as Takanuva from 2008. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is this guy is actually the same size, if not taller, than Bionicle's non-combiner sets, so not counting things like Cardaz or Ultimate Duma, because But anyway, size isn't everything. But what makes Witch Doctor's build just actually somewhat genius is the fact that it uses a bunch of ball joints to create a lot of friction, so it doesn't need to have all these supports on its back. The way this thing is constructed basically makes whatever angle you want to move a limb its own joint. His articulation is pretty close to what you can achieve with the much more stable $8 figures. But the construction and posability aren't the only reasons I love this figure. I love this figure also just because it looks awesome. I love the way the color scheme looks for starters. I just love the large amounts of white with just little red pops in it. And it also just has little bits of black to round it off. Obviously, I love the skull look he has. I mean, that's just an awesome look. I also really like the way these ice shields are kind of used as armor throughout the figure. I think it's a really nice reincorporation of those parts. The weapon on the left arm is kind of lame, if I'm being honest, at least in this form, but they put some stuff on the back of it to kind of let you turn into a giant claw. I don't know if that's intentional, but even if it's not intentional, that's cool. And unfortunately, I gotta be a heretic for just a little longer, because, yeah, this thing has a couple more issues. Starting off with this weird construction on the hips. What is this? What's going on here? Why is this like this? Why is this asymmetric? It just looks weird. It kind of looks rushed, like the designer didn't have the time to choose between these two designs, so it just kind of shipped like this. He also comes with these red tubes that you can use instead of these white ones, so maybe I might be onto something. The forearms are left fairly open and look way too skinny for a figure this big and bulky, especially with this tiny little hand holding this staff that, again, is way too undersized. Like I said before, this thing is 1 foot tall, and this staff is just so tiny. Which kind of sucks because I like this staff, it looks cool, but it's more like he's holding a maraca than an actual staff. I don't see why the axle on the bottom of the hand couldn't be a little longer. Okay, I mean, it doesn't have to be this long, but they do make axles in this size now. And unfortunately, there actually is a pretty significant flaw with this thing's construction that I don't think LEGO ever anticipated. I have so many of these socket joints that are just broken right here, and this piece is used all over the set for the connection, so this set will break if you try moving it too quickly. And as you can see here on the shoulder, the Technic piece is also breaking, which is so unfortunate. But honestly, that's everything, and everything I complain about is very minor just to how fantastic this set is. Like, I don't know, like, caveman brain me is just so blown away by how awesome this thing is that everything I just complained about doesn't really matter. I still consider this to be a near perfect set. And just like the 1.0s, I can't really put this thing on the normal tier list because it just kind of gatekeeps everything out of that tier. So Witch Doctor gets his own tier above S tier. Masterpiece. And now that we're done with Savage Planet, it's time to move on to Breakout, and we're going to start with the heroes. Now, I have them all here, but I'm going to look at each of them individually. I just have them all here so I can go over kind of the big changes that Breakout made in context of the heroes. Starting with the obvious things, some of these guys are bigger than others. Yes, if you exclude Stormer, because he's kind of his own thing, these guys come in 2 price tiers, a $10 price tier and a $13 price tier, as opposed to previous ways where they are all $8. Something else they all have in common is that all their hero cores are now white, which personally I prefer the individually colored cores more, but for the most part these work out fine. The original 6 have their original helmets back, while Nex, Evo, and Raka have new helmets. Nex and Evo get helmets based off their 2.0 headgear, while Raka gets something just kinda random. I mean, it looks good, it works, but it's just kinda random. They're all rocking out with a pair of handcuffs that are way too long. I mean, you can fix the issue by taking a couple links off the chain, but it naturally looks kind of weird because on most of them, especially the $10 figures, they just kind of drag on the ground. They also all have this blaster weapon, which I'll admit is at least cool looking. I really like how the top half of the shell looks like, well, a blaster, as opposed to previous waves where if you didn't know these shot, then you wouldn't even know that this is supposed to be a blaster. Although one gripe I really do have with these, and I don't know why this is the case for so many of them, but you can easily put a hand in the blaster, and for most of these sets, LEGO just didn't do that. There's really only one of these sets that it makes sense for, but I'll get to them when I get to them. Something else that's standard is for the $13 figures, they have back covering. The $10 figures don't, and one of the $13 figures doesn't, but I'll get to them when I get to them. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into these guys, and we're gonna start with the $10 tier, and the first one of these that I ever had, Surge. Now something that immediately strikes me with this figure right off the bat is this really cool sword. I'm a sucker for really cool weapons, and this piece is a really nice throwback to his original set. I also like his bulky design. It makes sense because he's, well, out in the vacuum of space, so he needs to have armor that can withstand the vacuum of space. But unfortunately, the bulk isn't really carried the entire way through the figure, most notably with the shoulders and the wrists.
I mean, the wrists are just kind of fine, whatever. That doesn't matter a whole lot. But with the removal of this standard chest plate introduced with the 2.0s, this torso does not look good at all. And this is a problem that's pretty much unique to Surge. All the other sets either use the smaller torso with the more narrow shoulders, so it doesn't look as awkward, or they have something helping to cover up the shoulders. I'm also not a very big fan of this set's color distribution at all, ignoring the fact that Surge is supposed to be the blue one, because that would just break my legacy rule. I don't like how his arms are just completely green with no blue in them whatsoever. And the only thing that really breaks the colors up are either the weapons or the little tips on his shoulders. And to top it off, Surge only has one hand. Personally, I don't really like this set. I think it's the worst of the $10 heroes, but I don't think it's a terrible set, so I'm just gonna go and throw it in a C tier. Anyway, now that I'm done with that, let's move on to a much cooler set, Evo. Now, immediately something that stands out about this set is this awesome Mega Man type tank arm. It's a very simple design, and yet looking at it, it definitely looks like it could do a lot of damage. This thing really does live up to the name Tank Arm, although if I were to nitpick a little bit, I don't like how everything in it is gunmetal. It's got a similar problem to Surge's arms. Something less subjective is its articulation, which is also not great. It can get into decent poses just fine, but unfortunately it's far from that ideal 90-degree bend. And of course, to top it off, he doesn't have a hand under that blaster. An interesting little quirk with Evo is that his hero cuffs are stored on his shoulder, which, I mean, it's just kind of an awkward place to touch. Like, yeah, you could do it, but I don't know, it's just weird. I do like the leg design. I especially like the lower half because it kind of makes him look like he's wearing some heavy-duty boots. Overall, I think this is a pretty good $10 figure. Nothing amazing, nothing offensive, just a really cool, solid toy. Fits very comfortably in the B tier. Next up is Mechs, who, honestly, I think is kind of an overhated set. They did kind of the Surge thing where they took the orange guy and just made him a different color, but I'm not really paying attention to that stuff, and I really like this kind of circuit board pattern on the chest plate. Another small detail I like is this use of a harpoon as an antenna. I think it just looks cool. Next is supposed to be the tech guy, so it just kind of adds to that. Moving on to the weapons, of course he has the same blaster that all the other heroes have, except he's actually got a hand underneath, and it's black for some reason. I mean, it just feels like a very random choice. I don't know, maybe the set designer was just a really big fan of Ray Gillette, and this is a very obscure reference. And on his other arm, he's got a big laser cutter, which takes up room for the other hand, so he still only has one hand. But apart from that, I think this is a pretty solid design. Unfortunately, it does look awkward from a lot of angles because it's got a very large hollow gap just kind of in the center of it, but from most angles it does look pretty good as a laser cutter. The tube attached to it actually kind of helps keep that microphone piece from swiveling around, which is nice. But there is a slight problem when it comes to the laser piece itself, and that is it's kind of brittle. Not only can the long antenna part actually break off, but the stud is actually kind of cracking. I don't know how easy it is to see on camera, but the stud is cracking, so this piece is breaking, which is just so unfortunate. Overall, I'd say Nex is a pretty solid $10 figure. I definitely don't think he's as good as Evo, but I think he's definitely better than Surge, so B tier. Alright, last and certainly not least for the $10 tier, we have Stringer. Now, right off the bat, black and blue, very pretty color scheme. This thing is very visually appealing to look at, especially with that transparent chest plate that just looks awesome. He's got his own exclusive armor that looks like a speaker. He's got a big two-handed weapon that looks kind of guitar-esque. He actually includes both his hands, so I guess he gets some nice little bonus points for that. Really, the only problem this set has is its lack of back covering. Right, apart from the open back just kind of looking bad, the reason it's actually kind of a bigger issue on Stringer is that transparent chest piece. Apply enough light and you can just see right through it, and it looks so weird. If he had something to cover up the back, like one of the feet on the $13 figures, then he would probably be an S tier set, but unfortunately that's a pretty big blunder, so A tier it is. That's gonna do it for the $10 tier, so let's go ahead and move up to the $13 tier, and why not start with what is basically Breakout's mascot, Raka. Now, right off the bat, this set looks awesome. I remember being a kid back in the day and having my mind blown by the fact that this is an actual real Hero Factory set that you could just go out and buy. He's got a really good color scheme with that bright warm gold, the gunmetal, and bright silver, with little bits of bright transparent green that really capture the eye on his shield, his blaster, and his head. His helmet has a little monocle, which looks cool, although I would have preferred if it was on the same side as the blaster. A detail on the shield arm that I do like quite a bit is this extra piece of armor, because it kind of makes him look like he's got his own little tank arm for defense. Unfortunately, the flaws really come in when you look at his other arm, and I'm not just talking about the fact he's got one hand, because unlike every other hero in Breakout, it actually makes sense for him to have one hand, just due to how his crossbow is constructed. The issue I have is actually right behind that crossbow, because instead of having a regular sized arm, he's got a little nub that just kind of attaches to the crossbow, and it does hinder posability quite a bit. Not as much as you would think, but it's still just kind of worse. And my best guess as to why this is the case is because if Lego included the regular size bone, then the profit margin on the set would not be acceptable. But that's a theory I'm basing off of pretty much nothing. But while the forearm is lame, the crossbow itself is pretty cool. You can angle these blades on the side of it, and I really like this ammo belt. Overall verdict for Raka is that this is definitely a great set. Yeah, his arm kind of sucks, but really other than that, this thing is basically perfect. And I don't think the arm is bad enough to keep him out of S tier, so here we have an S tier set. Alright, next up we have Breeze, who I honestly think is about as good as Raka. Now to start off, I really like her appearance. She's got a design pretty reminiscent of Samus Aran from the Metroid series, especially with these shoulder pads. I also really like the energy shield and how its kind of honeycomb shape is replicated on the chest plate, especially because that original helmet was pretty bug-like to begin with. Although something I'm not too keen on is that her sword and shield are on the same arm, which just is kind of awkward. I'm also not a very big fan of these weird rocket builds on the side of her boots, because for a figure this bulky and tanky, these don't look like very effective rockets. Hell, the feet they use look more convincing as rocket boots than the actual rockets do. And unfortunately, reusing those feet leaves this little gap in the side of them, which not a big fan of that. But moving back onto things I do like, I really like the incorporation of a white on this figure, especially with the arms. I mean, having those bones in white kind of solves the color blocking issue that I had with Surge, Evo, and Ferno. There's also kind of a weird variation quirk with this set where the helmet is like very subtly a different shade of green to the rest of the green on the figure. I have no clue why the set is like this, and I'm not sure if this is showing on camera, so I'll just put up a screenshot from Jang's review. But yeah, overall, this is a really good looking set. I like it quite a lot. I like it about as much as Raka, and the only reason I would give Raka S rank and not Breeze is if I was one of those weirdos that was mad that this toy robot for children in between the ages of 7 and 14 didn't make my dick hard.
Hey everyone, welcome to the top 10 World Shield Factory sets. Behold, the original CCBS male goalie, Breeze Breakout for number 7 with her manly abs. Now, also, the only people I see who will find this set as a sexy female set. Sexy female set.
But I have had actual conversations with real women, so S tier. Alright, and next up we have Ferno. And yeah, if you're a frequent viewer, you'd know I do not like this set at all. But hey, it's not the worst thing on this list, so let me go ahead and get the praise out of the way. Mainly because that list is very short. I like the scuba gear, I think it looks good. It's pretty easy to pose around, it doesn't really intrude with other basic articulation, and it's pretty easy to recognize as scuba gear. I like this medieval spear used as a harpoon. I think it looks a lot cooler than if they just used the regular minifigure spear. And yeah, that's pretty much all the praise I have for this set. This set is just death by 1,000 paper cuts. Okay, let me just go ahead and turn them around and expose this set's biggest sin. It's got no back covering. It is the only one of the $13 sets in all of Breakout to not have back covering. This is unacceptable in my opinion. Like, this set is literally substandard by default. Like, I'm sorry, were these tubes worth it? Why are they even here in the first place? What are these, breathing tubes? This is a robot. He doesn't breathe. LEGO decided to only give him one hand, which they just didn't have to do that, but they did it anyway. He's got this random piece of transparent orange armor, which is the only transparent orange on the entire set, so it just sticks out and looks weird in a bad way. Like, it just breaks the color scheme in the arm for pretty much no reason. Speaking of the arms breaking the color scheme, if you just want to go ahead and remove those tubes and the Zamor sphere, all the silver on this set is on his left arm. And apart from his hand, that's the only color on his left arm. So, overall opinions on the set? Well, apart from the open back, pretty much everything that I complain about is completely my opinion and completely subjective, so I'll show a little mercy and throw Ferno down into C tier. Alright, so rounding off the $13 heroes, we have Bulk, who I'm pretty mixed on, if I'm being honest. Of course, for a toy called Bulk, he definitely lives up to the name. I really like these shoulder pads, and I especially love the use of the hero cuffs on the torso. Like, if you were to remove Breakout's gimmick of, you know, the heroes tracking villains down and personally arresting them, and just kind of had this on here as an ornament, it would just look cool. He also has a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher, and yeah, that is definitely a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher. I mean, it hangs off the back a little more than I would like, but it still looks cool. Of course, there's also this very weird decision to make these bushings red, which I'm pretty sure this is the only Hero Factory set with red bushings when the regular gray bushings would have looked better and integrated into the color scheme. Or maybe it wouldn't really, because this thing's color scheme is a mess.
Okay, this thing is rocking out with black, silver, gunmetal, orange, gold, and since I feel like being a dick, green and red. They also decided to throw this random ass blue pin on his back, which, like, why? I thought maybe it was there so you could try repositioning the rocket launcher over there, but no, the shoulder pad stopped that from working, so why is this here? I thought maybe the combination model used it, but no, it doesn't. And of course he's got the small arm like Raka, but unlike Raka, he doesn't even have an improved blaster to compensate. Like Ferno, I just find this to be such a confusing and baffling set. So he joins Ferno in C tier. And to wrap up the Breakout heroes, we have Stormer XL. And I mean, this is exactly what the box says. This is in fact a very large Stormer. And comparing him to last year's Raka XL, I definitely prefer this much more slick design. Gone are the ugly, messy support systems that inflated the set's price and piece count, and now we have these little pieces that were actually introduced with these superheroes that have these little rubber balls in them that just add a little extra friction. And I mean, the results speak for themselves. This thing has pretty good balance, especially because of these really large feet. The torso is a custom design using the chest plate introduced with the CCBS Hulk, and I definitely think it looks good on this set. Although something I'm not a very big fan of is the fact that this blue stuff here is stickers, because this set has a lot of stickers. Because on top of the chest having stickers, we also have this weird asymmetric leg design that utilizes stickers, and all of these drones have stickers on them. I also don't really like these open ball joints right here. I feel like a couple extra pieces of armor should have been included to cover that up. I also really don't like the arms because they are tiny. He's got these big bodybuilder superhero proportions with the legs and the body, and then you get to the arms, they're just like regular wimpy man arms. Moving on to the weapons, he does have the second hand under his blaster, making him one of 3 heroes to have both of their hands. He's got a sword which does look pretty cool, although I wish they included another one of these pieces so these axles aren't showing. And he's got this little clip on his back that you can kind of store the sword on. I mean, technically it works. Not very well, but it does work. So if this set was $20, it could potentially be an S tier set, but I feel like for $25, the open ball joints on the torso, skinny arms, and lack of printing warrants it sitting down in A tier. Alright, now that we have finally finished up the Breakout heroes, let's talk about the Breakout villains. And we'll start with Toxic Reaper. Now this is a really cool little $10 set. I especially love the way the transparent green armor looks on him. Especially because his accent color is black, which really helps these pieces just pop so much more. I also really love this torso design. It's a very simple design that gives him this very unique hunched over alien look. And I think it definitely looks better than if they just made his body the regular CCBS build. Unfortunately, it's not done perfectly. It's got a couple issues, most notably the ball joint on top of his head. Would have been nice to get something to cover that up. Another kind of strange issue that this set has is that the sockets that the toxic tanks attach to are gray for some reason, which just like, why? And like Jetbug, this set has a very weird variation quirk with the feet. So as you can see here, one of the feet uses the 2008 joint, and as you can see, it's broken. It still holds on, but it's broken. But his other foot uses the CCBS joint. That's because this set has 2 variations, one that came with the 2008 feet and one that came with CCBS feet. And the guy I bought this from gave me one of each. But I think Toxic Reaper is a really good set for $10. It's got a couple issues that keep it out of the S tier, but it's a very easy A tier set.
Alright, next we have Jawblade, and yeah, earlier in this video you saw that I put him in the number 5 spot on the worst Hero Factory sets list. I do not think this is a good set at all. Easily the biggest problem this set has is that it just is not designed to look good on land. Pretty much all official art for this set shows him floating, and yeah, he doesn't look bad when he's floating, but unfortunately there's no stand or anything like that comes with this set, so he's just on the ground, just there. Okay, you want to know the best way to display this thing? Just put it in some water, because it actually floats, so I guess that's kind of a plus. The jaw reuses this old Bionicle, like, blade or foot piece. I don't know how these were used. And that this just wasn't a good idea because this jaw just has this massive gap in it and it doesn't look good. Although, I will be fair and say I do like the functionality of the jaw. I like how you can just kind of grab these fins and move it up and down. That's at least done well. He's got arms with hands and dual plasma pistols, and I mean, I think these look fine enough, although the parts that they used for the wrists aren't compatible with the hero cuffs, which is just bizarre. And I think it's a major shame that this set is not good, because a concept, I love it. It's got that, you know, goofy Saturday morning cartoon feel that makes me really like Hero Factory as a theme. But good ideas don't mean good executions. So finally, Firelord can have some company down in the F tier. Next, we have Thornrax. Now this guy is actually the second CCBS set to not have a regular torso in it, the first one being Witch Doctor. It's built using a Technic lift arm and a couple of those connectors introduced with Waspix. And they're used to make this kind of tripod design with the arms and the tail. Normally I'm not a very big fan of tripod designs, but thanks to the inclusion of wings I don't need to kind of figure out how this thing's supposed to walk, because it can just fly. Speaking of which, I really like that they brought these wings back from Gordes, I want to say. I think they look much better than the other set of wings we got. Although I'm not a very big fan of the tubes they included with it, because they just kind of look random. Something I do like, on the other hand, is the sheet of blue that they decided to put in here. I think it looks a lot cooler than if they used the regular Mata blue. I also really like the head. It's reused from Black Phantom's Arachnix drone, but redone in black, and I think it looks really cool. Overall, I think Thornrax really succeeds where Jawblade fails. I think this is a pretty solid set. I don't see any reason to give it anything lower than A tier. And finally, for the $10 sets, we have XT4, which I consider to be kind of an overhated set. It's built using this cool little mini torso. Kind of makes his body design look like a little ball with a bunch of limbs splaying out everywhere. It's a very unique look, at least. He's got 4 arms, 2 of which have this little blade weapon on the end, and I think these look pretty fine as stabbing weapons. Another one has this saw blade, which acts the exact way you would expect it to. It spins pretty effectively. The final arm is probably the worst, though. I'm not a big fan of how these claws don't really align, and the laser piece has a very nasty habit of breaking either the mold itself or the stud cracking. Moving down to the legs, I actually like them quite a bit. Something I like about this set a lot is its use of the light gray. Just kind of incorporates it into the color scheme, but it's not made with armor. I also like the inclusion of the yellow Ben 10 feet. I'm not very big on the head though. I think it's just kind of a derpier and dumber looking version of Meltdown. Overall, XT4 is a decent little set that fits pretty comfortably in the B tier. Moving up to the $13 tier, we are going to go ahead and start with Split Face. Now, this set's main gimmick is the half and half thing, and for the most part I think it pulled off pretty well. It's not pulled off perfectly. The torso armor is gunmetal with a bunch of printing, and the back plate, I really kind of have an issue with it being red. I kind of wish it was a more neutral color in this color scheme, like black or gray, instead of it being red. The head design is something I'm a little more mixed on. On the one hand, it's cool that they're two halves and you can basically buy another one and unsplit the face if you want, but it kind of comes at the cost of the side of the head looking very weird. But the different halves aren't different only in color, they're actually different in theme, with the red half being kind of organic. Honestly, I really like the drool and bubbles coming out of his mouth. Just kind of adds some character. He's also got some of those round armor pieces, and I like the ones on his shoulder and knee. Not too big on the one on his hips. I think it just doesn't look very good. Just looks a little awkward. This side's main weapon is the Infecticide launcher, and I think it's a decent enough weapon. I do like the Return of the 2.0 blaster. The gunmetal side has a much more mechanical look to it, and it's achieved pretty well thanks to the use of these 2.0 engine pieces. And I also like the little added color that comes with these little green spikes. The weapon on this side is the Shredding Claw, and I think it's a pretty good looking slashing weapon. But I guess that's gonna do it for Splitface. Pretty cool concept, done pretty well. He's a little too flawed for S tier, but I think he fits pretty well into the A tier. Next up, we have Voltix. Now the first thing you really notice about this set is just how many colors are on him. And all those colors are mainly due to the electrical elements and the wires, because the figure himself has a pretty consistent color scheme of gunmetal red and purple. Which, I mean, personally, red isn't really a color I associate with electrical villains, and there's a lot of red in Breakout already, so this just feels kind of redundant. There's some blue put into the figure with some of these wires, and I kind of wish we got some blue armor included with the figure so we could have like a positive charge side and negative charge side, but oh well. Moving down to the weapons, he has a regular blaster on one arm and this admittedly pretty cool lightning whip on the other. It's built in a way to let you spin it around, and it does hold pretty well and can look pretty dynamic, so I guess that works out pretty well. Although using a tentacle for this probably wouldn't be my first choice. He's got a big lever on his back that you can flip down. It's a feature. I don't know, personally I think this set just kind of feels lazy and half-assed. I think it's mainly because this is one of the 3 sets that use this helmet mold. Voltix is an alright figure, nothing amazing, nothing offensive, it's just a fine set, so it goes right into B tier. Finally, for the $13 sets, we have Core Hunter. Now, right off the bat, black and bright red is a fantastic color scheme. And with all these spikes he's covered in, you can definitely tell this guy is not a good guy. Even though in the books he used to be. I really like the helmet on this guy. The goggles make him look like some kind of Black Ops or Special Forces agent. On one of his arms he has the generic Breakout blaster that I don't care that much about. It looks fine enough here. But on the other arm we have his core removal tool. Unfortunately, its construction doesn't allow it to actually move, but it's easy enough to picture it moving. And it's pretty easy to picture him doing a classic Mortal Kombat fatality with it. He comes with this little belt that you're actually supposed to put hero cores on, which is so weirdly dark and violent for LEGO that I honestly love it. Especially because all the villains come with hero cores, because that's how you activate the codes to get points in the online game that you can't play anymore. And even if you could play it, you don't have access to LEGO servers, so you can't use the codes anymore. The point I'm getting at is that you probably have a bunch of these laying around, so, you know, why not just give them a full belt, let them become just the absolute serial killer. Unfortunately, this set has 2 fairly minor issues. The first one being that the back of his legs are just left completely open and don't look good from the back. The second problem is the arms. The parts they use on his forearm are not compatible with the hero cuffs, so he's just impossible to arrest, I guess. Yeah, I'm not sure how that slipped past LEGO's quality assurance, but whatever. Doesn't really matter that much. Overall, Core Hunter is just a sweet set, and I think it definitely deserves to stand next to Raka and Breeze and the S tier.
Next, we have
Black Phantom! The most powerful of all villains!
this guy is the third iteration of the Fire Lord build and easily the best. For starters, his arms don't have these annoying supports that absolutely ruined Raka XL and Fire Lord. Now he's got these new friction adder joints that were first introduced with the Superheroes line. He's got a pretty good looking and consistent color scheme of black and dark red, with a few little bits of green. However, he's got two different shades of green, one for the head and one for the things on his back. I wish they were the same color, but it's ultimately not that big of a deal. His legs are the same as Raka XL's, except he uses smaller armor, which I'm pretty sure makes him cheaper. The only thing I'm not too keen on is the fact they used gunmetal armor on his feet. Kinda wish they used black, because this is the only gunmetal on the set if you don't count the spikes on his shoulders. The arms do a pretty good job as arms, no real complaints here. His weapons are also pretty nice. He's got this kind of mace staff that looks pretty cool, and you can easily convert it into a two-hand mode. Instead of using a generic blaster, his blaster is instead connected to this Arachnix drone, which is pretty cool. He can hold it like a blaster, he can just deploy it and let it seek out targets, or you can just put it on his shoulder and have him look cool. Moving on to the torso, and this is really the only minor issue I have with the set, but I don't like the way this looks. I wish they included some kind of lift arm to cover that up. Overall, Black Phantom is a pretty awesome set. There's a good reason I bought this big-ass display case that has him and Raka. They're just really good sets, so long as you ignore the garbage right next to them. Seriously, they didn't even build Ferno or Jawblade correctly, and the pieces are glued in place, so I can't even fix it. Anyway, Black Phantom is going in the S tier. And finally, for Breakout, we have Speeda Demon. Now, the obvious thing to compare this set to would be the Ferno bike, and I think this easily blows it out of the water. It's a lot more solid, it's a lot more sleek, the handlebars move with the bike. It can stand up pretty easily, and it looks good from practically any angle. The set also includes a couple weapons that function for the bike. He's got a set of swords on his back, just to kind of swipe at anyone chasing him. He's got these electric handlebars, which you can just kind of use to shoot at people, and the bike has these spikes on the wheels they can use to attack other vehicles pursuing him. Speeda also stays on the bike pretty easily thanks to both the handlebars and the fact his ass just kind of clips into the seat. Taking Speeda off the bike, and this is honestly a pretty good figure in its own right. Like, the selling point is obviously the motorcycle, but LEGO didn't half-ass the figure. He's got a very striking green and gold color scheme that really pops out and makes you notice him. I love the way these golden horns look with the Black Phantom helmet. They help just kind of make him look aerodynamic, and I mean, his name is Speeda Demon. It's a pun I enjoy. It's a pun I enjoy so much that I created a bunch of weird fanfiction characters to join his gang. He's got a set of arms on his back, and they can move decently enough. He's also got a plate on his back to help cover that up, so cool. Thank you, LEGO. The only real issue I have with Speeda himself is the upper legs. The armor they use is just a little too small. I don't think it looks that good. I wish they would have either used bigger armor or smaller bone. But I mean, other than that, this is a pretty solid figure. Now let's move on to the bike. Now, for the most part, the bike is pretty much perfect. It's got a couple gaps, and I'm not a big fan of color scheme breaking Technic, which it's got a little bit of, but overall it's a pretty good looking bike. We see the return of a lot of pretty cool pieces, like the Surge Swords used as kind of an electric exhaust. We get a recolored Scout Drone in purple, and we get a Scroll Armor in purple.
As I said earlier, the bike stands up on its own pretty well due to this kind of armor engine. I mean, overall, Speeda Demon is an excellent set. It's got a really good figure, everything works the way it should, and for $35, I don't think you could really do much better. Easy S tier. And now we're moving on to the Brain Attack heroes. So like Breakout, Brain Attack heroes come in basically 3 flavors. Your standard small $10 heroes, the slightly bigger $13 heroes, and XL, even though we have technically 2 different price tiers for XL, but we'll get to it when we get to it. And we'll start this off with the $10 heroes, which are clone sets. Their builds are literally exactly the same with different weapons, which on the one hand, after Breakout gave us a unique design for every hero, this feels kind of lazy and disappointing. But on the other hand, most of you watching probably didn't even notice until I pointed it out. So I'll go ahead and take Breeze here and show off the things that they have in common and show off differences individually. Now, Brain Attack has 2 major design gimmicks. Number 1 are these core clamps that don't really do anything. They're supposed to sit slightly above the core, but if you nudge them just a little bit, they just kind of clamp on, and I don't know, I mean, it looks fine enough. I just think it's a very weird selling point. The other main gimmick with Brain Attack are these flip-down visors. Unfortunately, Breeze and debatably Stormer are the only ones that don't look absolutely awful without the visor down. Another gimmick for the $10 figures specifically is weapon storage, which, I mean, fine. I would have preferred back covering, but I'm not going to pretend like it makes the set worse. Except for when it does. I mean, that pretty much does it for like the new things introduced. So let's go ahead and talk about Breeze specifically. Her primary weapon is this blade staff that, while looking cool, I don't really like that it's built using these pieces that can swivel around. Just makes posing it a little awkward. Just kind of irritates my brain a little bit when these little bits aren't lined up perfectly. But the weapon can actually convert into a 2-hand mode that can actually swing around pretty decently, so I guess you win some, you lose some. Her secondary weapon is this saw blade shield that, I mean, yeah, it functions exactly how you'd expect. And that's pretty much it for Breeze, so let's move on to Bulk. Alright, Bulk's weapons are this recolored Captain America shield that you can store on his back, and this drill, which LEGO took some cues from Ruby and made it also a gun. His head, I'll be honest, I hate it. I think this looks terrible. I don't know why LEGO decided to just give him an expression like he stepped in dog shit. And LEGO never made this Brain Attack head in red, so he needs to have either blue, green, or yellow eyes, and they chose to use the green one, which not only makes his neck green, but also like his features look brown when you put the visor down. I don't like it. So now let's go ahead and move on to Raka, whose main weapons are this really cool looking sword. I mean, it's a single piece, but there's a reason I use it on my self-mock. I just think it looks really cool. Unfortunately, I do not like his other weapon anywhere near as much. I mean, I think the gimmick works fine, but its main issue is it just sticks so far out from the hand. That doesn't look good. It looks incredibly awkward when you're not looking at the shield part head on. Like Bulk and Breeze, Raka can also put his shield on his back, but for whatever reason, LEGO just wanted to use a color scheme breaking red part for this. Why? But I mean, it still spins on his back, so I don't know, you could turn him into Rotor at home. And finally, we have Evo, who is the most unique of the four, probably because he was released in a different wave. His weapon is the Tornado Staff, which is a two-handed bident with posable blades, and yeah, I think it looks pretty cool. It can spin pretty well, does that pretty effectively. His weapon storage, of course, is different from the rest because he doesn't have a shield, and yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Something I don't think looks as good is the fact that LEGO decided to give him a green head, which is less acceptable than Bolt's green head because the blue head already existed at this point. 3 other sets that released the same time as Evo used it. Yeah, so my words towards these sets have skewed fairly negative, but comparing them to Breakout's $10 sets, I don't think they're really that much worse. Really, the biggest issue I have with these sets is their lack of variety. But honestly, that's just more of a me thing, because these sets function just fine as toys. I'd say my overall verdict, better than Surge, worse than Stringer, on the same level as Nex and Evo, so they'll join Nex and Evo in B tier. Alright, we only have 2 $13 figures to go over, so let's start with Stormer. His main weapon is this sword that I think looks pretty cool. I like the way the hilt looks, it gives it kind of a gothic medieval look. On his other arm, he has a wrist-mounted shield with an ice blast, and I think this also looks pretty cool. He's also got some shoulder cannons that look pretty cool. I'm not a big fan of the fact they're mostly static, with the exception of them being able to retract, but when they retract, I don't know, what is this, Astro Boy now? His visor is printed, and I'm really not that big of a fan of it. In my opinion, it looks a bit over-designed. But something I do like is this helmet, and not because I have one of the rare ones in pink. And I mean, the main reason I like this helmet is because it makes Stormer, like, the only character in Hero Factory to have a consistent look throughout the entire series. Something that I'm not a big fan of, though, are the legs. Specifically, the upper legs. I don't like the way this looks. I think using either this size armor or the piece with a hole in it was just not a good idea. In my opinion, it just looks too skinny to be on this somewhat bulky figure. And that's gonna do it for Stormer. I do like this figure, but I think it's missing that something that really makes it A or S tier worthy. But you know what? I think it fits perfectly in the B tier. And for our other $13 set, we have Surge. Now, right off the bat, I love the colors on this set. I think the blue, silver, and transparent green do a very good job of complementing each other. He also has some transparent blue on the upper arms, but unlike, say, Breakout Ferno, the transparent armor is a similar enough color to where it doesn't really stand out in a bad way. The main weapon is this spinning electric blade, which is just a redo of Pyrox's weapon from the first wave, which on the one hand it feels kind of lame and lazy that LEGO recycled a weapon, but on the other hand it looks good, so I'm not complaining that much. He's got this neat little bonus scout drone, so you can either just deploy that or you could just pretend it's like a wrist-mounted blaster. And of course the main draw of this set, the jetpack. The wings fold up pretty neatly and look pretty good. They've also got some flick-fire missiles on the back. And there are a couple lasers that you could see as either exhaust or butt cannons. I think I'm starting to notice a theme here. But that's pretty much all I have to say about Surge. I think it's a very good little $13 set that definitely deserves a place in the S tier. Alright, now it's time to move up another price tier and talk about Ferno XL. So this guy actually has one of the most unique builds when it comes to Hero Factory sets, with the basically front of the torso and legs being regular CCBS, but the back assembly where the arms are attached are completely made out of Technic. Fairly reminiscent of the 2015 Toa Masters. Or I guess the Toa Masters are reminiscent of Ferno XL. Actually, these two sets are a lot more similar than I think people would like to admit. The legs are fairly similar to Stormer XLs with all the friction adders, but they're only one plate instead of the two plate that Stormer had. Because why bother completely covering up your legs with armor when you can just cover the awkwardness with a cape? He's got this cool fire sword in one hand and a shield instead of the other hand that also shoots fire. Yeah, definitely a winning combination with the cape there. Definitely no foreseeable problems. Yeah, whatever, it's cool, don't think about it. Looking at the torso, I think it strikes the perfect combination between Stormer's very simplistic look and Raka XL's very busy look. With my only real problems being that the cape is under the shoulders instead of on top of them. Just looks kind of weird. And there's this weird gap near his crotch. Yeah, that would have been very easy to cover up and fix. But since I'm already looking down here, kinda wish they gave us size 6 armor instead of the size 5, and not just because size 6 is extremely rare. Thank you, Bionicle G2. Moving on to the arms, he has these mace spike balls as shoulder armor, and I mean, it's unique and they get the job done, although they can make the arms look kinda barren from some angles, so win some, you lose some. As I mentioned earlier, his shield is his hand, which is kinda lame, because he's the only hero in Bright Attack to not have both hands. Lego's conspiring to annoy me. Moving on to the head, the visor is clear with some printing, and it looks pretty good when the visor is down, but you take that visor up and he, looks like a dog. Hey, wait a minute. Yeah, I recognize I was fairly negative towards this thing, but honestly, apart from the dropship, this is my favorite hero set, and I think he's definitely deserving of the S tier. And finally, we have Jet Raka. Alright, so this set is comprised of 2 assemblies, so I'm just going to look at them individually and then together, starting with the lamer of the 2, Raka. Okay, now this figure is just kinda bizarre. It's supposed to be the same as the $10 set, but it's just covered in bizarre inaccuracies. I mean, I'll give credit where it's due. The legs at least have the correct armor color placement, but the feet are the wrong color. And you know what? I could picture this as like a thing that robots in cartoons do where they can just like extend their limbs to make themselves taller. But then you get to the upper body, and you realize his core clamps are the wrong color. However, I do think that this version has something over the original, and that is the shoulder armor eliminates that chicken neck problem that it had. I don't know, does Makuro's secret guidebook have the answer? I mean, I guess Zib gave Raka armor compatible with the jetpack. But I mean, all inaccuracies aside, look at him. He's incredibly skinny, he's got the same weird crotch issues that Ferno does. The back of the figure is just comically awful. And he's the size of an XL for... well, I mean, to have leg support, but the funny thing is, it doesn't need it. This figure is 100% redundant. The jetpack is completely compatible with pretty much every other hero in the series that doesn't have back cover. But anyway, let's talk about the actual cool part of the set now, the jetpack. Now, full disclosure, this set is supposed to have stickers, but the person that sold this to me didn't give me the stickers, and honestly, I don't care enough to track down stickers, so we're just sticking with the vanilla version. Now, in its little standby mode, it doesn't really look that impressive, but you pull down this lever and it looks a lot cooler. Unfortunately, there's really no way to keep it like this, unless you want to stick something into the gears to jam it up. And I mean, I really only have 2 issues with the jetpack. The more minor of the 2 is the fact that the shoulder guns are directly linked to the wings, so you can't have the wings out and the shoulder guns pointing up, which seems like a bit of an oversight because that's naturally how you kind of want this thing to move. And the other issue is the fact that the jetpack cannot stand up without a pilot in it. There are these flick-fire missiles connected to these swords that go out, and whether intentional or not, it kind of gives like a cool wing blade look. And the entire thing is fairly swooshable. It's a fairly fun set. So my overall verdict on Jet Raka as a whole is that it's decent, a bit overpriced, and the hero figure you get is just straight out bad. But you know, it's not a total failure of a set, so I think C tier is a fair placement for it. Alright, now finally it is time to talk about the Brain Attack villains. Again, they come in 3 price tiers, and there are only 2 $10 figures, so let's go ahead and knock them out, starting with Scarox. Alright, so just a quick little thing with the Brain Attack villains. These tails are supposed to be tapped into the back, but in my opinion it just doesn't look as good, so I'm not doing that. But anyway, with the Brain Attack villains, LEGO wanted to start incorporating action features back into the builds, which, I mean, I'm all for. These are toys made for children. It makes sense that they'd be fun to play with, but man, does this set and another set that I'll get to really suffer and basically get completely ruined by these little gimmicks. And it's hard to conceal, but there's this bright red lever on his back that you're supposed to flip, and then it makes his arms swing, but unfortunately, due to the way his head is constructed, the brain will often interfere with this gimmick, apart from the fact that when you don't look at it from the front, this gimmick looks awful. I don't know why LEGO insisted on using red on the torso bit. Like, I can understand the rationale behind using the red on the lever, but why is this red? And really, that's all I have to say about this figure, because everything that's not this gimmick is painfully generic CCBS. Well, I mean, painfully generic apart from the fact his arms are only 1 bone, so they don't even bend. And it's just objectively worse than pretty much every other $10 set that you could get at the same time. Scarox is pretty much a worthless figure, and he very much deserves to be in the F tier. Next, we have Aquagon. While not as bad as Scarox, it's still not a very good figure. It's essentially just another copy and paste CCBS build. Now, I do like his head mold. I like this transparent armor, and I really like these swords. The main functionality of this set is that you can put the swords together, which, I mean, okay, I'm not going to pretend this makes the set worse, but it doesn't really make it any better. And that's really it for Aquagon. It doesn't try to do anything. Looking at other sets that I threw in F tier, they at least try to do something? Hell, everything in C tier has more effort than Aquagon. But Aquagon just doesn't even care. I feel like it would be an insult to the entire list if I put it anywhere above F tier. Moving up another price tier, and we'll just go ahead and rip off the bandage immediately. Bruiser is an awful set. And the main reason this set is bad is because of his, little self-pleasure gimmick. And the function itself isn't necessarily the issue. At the very least, you can move this piece of armor to have the arm hold in a pose. But unfortunately, unless you are looking at it from this angle, you can see the Technic lift arm that it's made out of. And even worse, it can't move. and it's got these two very noticeable gaps. And my little self-pleasure joke might have been actually correct, because when you go to his other arm, why does he even have a second arm to begin with? And the arms are like the only real issue with this set, but when you compare him to other $13 sets, it's just laughably worse. Bruiser definitely deserves a spot in the F tier. Alright, let's move on to a set that doesn't completely suck ass, Ogrum. Now the main action feature for this set, if you even want to call it that, is you can swing the toy around and it makes the flail swing. Which, I mean, it is kind of a lame action feature, but at least doesn't ruin the rest of the toy. I do like the colors, pretty much for no other reason than dark green and brown are not very common colors within CCBS. But the gunmetal I also really like, because I think like its metallic look with the color just gives it a kind of orc wearing armor look to him. I also really like these tusks on his face. And a cool little feature is you can remove them to do battle damage. On one hand, he's got fingers and these vines sticking out, and I mean, they look cool enough. Unfortunately, his other hand doesn't have fingers, which, I mean, like, yeah, this piece itself looks like a closed fist, but this little black bit sticking out the front makes it not look like that. As for the back of the figure, yeah, that's not great. It does look a little better if you want to stick the tail into the back of it, but those legs don't get any covering. Overall, Ogrum is just a dope, enjoyable little $13 set. It's not amazing, but it really doesn't have any massive issues. So I will throw him into the B tier. Next, we have Pyrox, who is actually fairly unique amongst $13 sets because he's short. And that's not a complaint at all. If anything, he is better off for it, because I think this is actually a really good set. He's this weird little lava minotaur with a Freddy Krueger claw and a flamethrower. Weapons so cool they got reused for Wave 2 sets. Unfortunately, this figure's cool factor isn't enough to throw it in S tier, because it's got a few coloration issues, weirdly enough. Its face has this large open mouth, but LEGO just had to use the green head and not even give people like me that remake these sets the option to give it a red head. Its brain is also yellow, which, I mean, it's not supposed to be a part of the creature, so I'll let that slide, even though every other Brain Attack villain's brains actually blend into their color scheme. But something that I will complain about is the chest plate. Like, come on, man, the piece already exists. LEGO just chose not to use it. I mean, Pyrox is just one of those dope, cool little sets that I just kinda like, so yeah, I'll throw it in A tier. And finally, for the $13 sets, we have Frost Beast. I think the transparent blue and white looks really good, with a couple extra red spikes that actually kind of help bring the entire look together, which is kind of surprising. It's like they wanted to incorporate the little spikes on the brain into the color scheme for only one set. He's also the only one of these sets that doesn't have any kind of action feature, if you exclude whatever Ogrum's trying to do. And again, I think he's better off for it. What he does have instead is this kind of unique torso build, which I do like, but unfortunately there are some fairly awkward angles to look at it. I do really like the way the shoulders look with this Chima armor, kind of looking like fur. His left hand is pretty much identical to Pyrox's, except instead of being black and transparent red, it's white and transparent blue. But his other hand has this pretty cool looking club sword. Unfortunately, I'm not a very big fan of the forearms being black. They just kind of look out of place, and I wish these pieces were either transparent blue, white, or hell, even red. But that complaint is kind of secondary to my biggest complaint about the set, and those are the feet. They look incredibly out of place because CCBS feet look like boots or shoes. Yeah, it's a shame we're stuck with these shoes instead of, say, white Raka feet. I would have loved to get them in white, and I think this probably would have made the set S tier. But you know what? In its current state, it's an A tier set. I like it. And finally, for Brain Attack, we have Dragon Bolt. Now, if you watched my revamp video, you'd probably be under the impression that I hate this set. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Size is the only issue I have with this set because it's just a really cool looking dragon. The head looks really good, and I love the way the jaw is kind of done. I think that's a really good use of the CCBS foot. I really like the way these teeth kind of look. And I also like these horns on the back of his head. The limbs are pretty skinny, but I think they work fine if you consider this as just like a scaled down version of this animal. Something that I don't like as much though is the tail. I wish we got a couple more segments on that. He's also got this open ball joint under his neck that kind of bugs me. The parts of his brain that are normally red are white, and that's because these little white bits actually glow in the dark, so that's just a cool little thing. Plus his brain is also dual molded, which definitely makes it look a lot more unique, like a big centerpiece figure for the Brain Attack villains. The main attraction of this set is definitely the wings. You can move these blade pieces around to make them look a little more dynamic, but the actual selling point of the wings is the little flapping gimmick, and I think it looks really good. It looks really natural and organic. Really, the only problem with the wings, and it's not even, well, an issue with the wings, it's just this big red button that why? Come on, you were so close. So overall, Dragon Bolt goes into S tier because despite his flaws, he's just so cool. Alright, now we're finally in the home stretch with Invasion from Below. But before I talk about the sets, I just want to go ahead and get the minifigures out of the way. These are my modified dropship mini heroes, and I'll explain why I'm using these instead of the vanilla ones in a second. Build-wise, these are all identical. Sometimes they'll just swap the gunmetal and silver chest pieces seemingly at random. So the unique part about each of these are their helmets, and I think Ferno, Stormer, Evo, and Breeze's helmets look really good. These look pretty spot on to their Breakout helmets. Unfortunately, Raka and Bulk are based off of their Brain Attack helmets, which I don't think look anywhere near as good, especially Bulk. And Surge looks like Nex was originally going to be in the theme, but LEGO mandated the designers change it to be Surge. I don't know, maybe the texture and design of this helmet and the scale just wouldn't be very feasible. A few of their eye colors are different just because I prefer it. But these figures do have one massive fatal flaw that, in my opinion, makes them absolutely worthless as little miniature toys, and that is their hands are super brittle. They will break within a few uses, and the way that these sets are put together, their hands are gripping onto some handlebars, so I can't really remove them without risking breaking the figure, and I don't really want to bother with that, especially because replacement limbs for Surge, Bulk, and Raka can get pretty expensive. And since I'm on the topic of minifigures, I might as well very quickly talk about the jumpers. These are all the varieties they come in. They're very simple little action gimmick things. You just push down on them, let go, they jump, and that's it. Dogs really like eating them, so buyer beware. Anyway, let's talk about the actual cool stuff. Did I say cool stuff? I meant stuff that you buy because it comes with a mini hero and 3 jumpers for $10, the Eva Walker. And yeah, there's not really much to say about this set. It's a very awkward tripod walker that it has a large cannon in front of it. Really, the only appeal of this set is that it's a good parts pack, but I'm not judging these as parts packs, I'm judging these as sets. And I'm struggling to even think of one positive about it that isn't connected to another set that I'll get to later. So yeah, F tier. Wave 1 also released with 3 $15 sets, so we'll just go ahead and start with the Stormer Freeze Machine. The primary weapon is this spinning ice blaster, which is pretty fun to fidget around with. However, I'm not a very big fan of how it's connected to the arm. That's just kind of wobbly and feels unstable. He's also got this radar dish, I guess, to inflate the piece count. He also has this cool piece of printed armor I like quite a bit. And the arm also has this ammo belt that looks kind of out of place. I kind of wish they used one of these tubes. I think it just would look better. The other arm has flick fire missiles and a hand. He's got big feet, and I'd make a guys with big feet joke, but I think LEGO already beat me to the punch. This is how this is supposed to be built, according to the instructions. Unfortunately, the torso has this open ball joint on top that I don't think looks very good. All of the bipedal Wave 1 walkers have this container on their backs that you're supposed to put jumpers in, and yeah, it works, and it adds a little extra bulk. I think it looks fine. Overall verdict on the Freeze Machine is that it's a decent set. I don't think it does anything exceptionally well to put it in A tier, but it definitely feels comfortable in B tier. Next up is the Ferno Jet Machine. Now, right off the bat, I love the way the torso is built, using CCBS bones for shaping, which you don't really see a lot in official sets. It's used to make extra wide shoulders, which allows the front of the mech to be a lot more compact, and I think it looks really good for it. Unfortunately, there is an open ball joint on top of it, which, yes, I still don't like, and it would have been pretty easy to cover up. The main feature of this set are the jets that you can point towards the back to make them, well, jets, or point them towards the front to make them flamethrowers. The jets also have these spotlights attached to them that feel pretty random, especially because this is one of the above ground walkers, but I'm not going to pretend it makes the set worse. The arms are pretty simple assemblies, but I think they look pretty good with these blasters on the bottom. The legs are also very simple, very skinny, but this thing's supposed to be thin because it's supposed to be flying around and shooting things. I also really like this little fire extinguisher. I think that's just a cute little detail. I like this set quite a bit and think it deserves a placement in the A tier. And finally, for the $15 Wave 1 mechs, we have the Raka Stealth Machine. Now, something that is pretty odd about this set, and this isn't going to affect the placement at all, but it's kind of weird that this set does not have a lot of gold in it, especially because Raka likes having gold because it's his trademark.
As long as it's still shiny and gold, I have to protect my trademark, you know.
He's got a regular Breakout launcher that's angled like this because the instructions say to angle it like that, because art is kind of like inconsistent with how it's supposed to be posed, but I mean, yeah, it's a big blaster. The other arm has this kind of pinching claw. It's meant to pick up jumpers, but it doesn't really do that very well. At least it looks cool. The build has this extra shoulder armor that is kind of hit or miss. I think from some angles it can look cool, but when you look at the mech head on, it's got these very noticeable gaps that, in my opinion, just don't look very good. But you know what? He at least has something covering up that ball joint on top of his torso, so I'll give props there. They also plant his minifig gun, so it's just kind of an extra turret on top of the machine. He's also got these little lasers in front of the machine to either use as, I guess, laser blasters or laser pointers. And the legs have a couple spare tools set on them, which would be nice if the minifigures wouldn't break if I tried to use them. I think this is probably my favorite of the $15 Wave 1 mechs, so I'm going to go ahead and throw them in A tier with Ferno. And finally, for the Wave 1 mechs, we have the Evo XL machine. Now this thing definitely has a lot of firepower. You got a bunch of flick fire missiles, some extra flick fire missiles, a big cannon, some lasers, a radar dish laser. This thing is out here to wreck face. He's got a big hand, but unfortunately LEGO decided to not put it on a ball joint, which is just kind of lame. The legs are pretty interesting. They're incredibly sturdy, however, they don't have any ankle articulation, which is unfortunate. However, it really doesn't compromise posability as much as you would think. It can still get into some pretty decent walking poses with little to no effort. This is also the only Hero Factory set to have any form of waist movement due to this play feature, and it works pretty well. I don't think the front of the torso, or I guess the upper half of the torso, looks very good. Not only is it just covered in a bunch of open ball joints, but I don't really like the way that this kind of looks, especially with all of these blue axles. Just looks like someone took a blue Sharpie and added a bunch of polka dots on it. Something you can do with the set if you have the EVA Walker is you can just kind of plug it into some of these ball joints on top of the torso. I could have sworn that I saw like an official way to do this, but I spent like an hour looking for it, so just kind of gave up. So overall verdict on the EVO XL machine. I think it's a pretty good set for $25, but I think it fits pretty comfortably in the A tier.
And Invasion from Below actually came with poly bags that are actual sets. LEGO gave us this incredibly basic and simple mech for Breeze, and honestly for $5 I think this thing is cute enough to put in a B tier. But if you just really like this build, you can invest double the price for a little extra armor, chainsaws, a flower, a jumper, and Raka. Yeah, this dinky little set is sold for the same price as all of these sets. Yeah, this thing's going in C tier. Alright, next we have the bulk drill machine, which is a very simple set. I mean, when you look at it from the front, it actually does look pretty cool. With my only real issue being that the drill doesn't really go that far past the front of the vehicle. So, you know, it can't really drill things in front of it very well. But when you turn it to its side, yeah, the construction gets much simpler. This looks way unfinished. Honestly, the only thing really saving this from being an F tier set is you can flip the drill around and it becomes a big turret. And you know what? Honestly, it looks pretty cool. So, yeah, C tier. Alright, next we have the Breeze Flea Machine. This thing is a tripod walker, kind of like the EVA Walker, except instead of having a big cannon, it's got this giant grappling hook that, I mean, kind of works. It's a little too heavy to reliably flick off, but it's also kind of weak, so you can definitely get to like hold on to something like right above it, but it's really just not that great of a play feature. And yeah, it looks messier than normal because I'm not very good at tying knots. The rest of the figure is just super generic and unimpressive, with the exception of this large gap in the torso. That just looks bad. Yep, the Breeze Flea Machine is an F tier set. Alright, now it's time for what is kind of our final hero figure. We have the Surge and Raka Combat Machine. Now, something called the Combat Machine obviously needs a lot of guns, and yeah, this thing has a lot of guns. We have the 6-shooter missile launcher, we have 4 missile launchers on the escape plane bit, we have 2 more launchers on the front of the figure, and then a big launcher. So yeah, this thing is definitely well armored, it has a lot of firepower. I also do like the way it looks from the front. However, like the other mechs I've been talking about, when you turn it to the side, it does not look anywhere near as good. The back legs feel incredibly under-armored, and these tiny little feet really don't help anything.
The main feature of this set is that you can disconnect Raka to just have him fly away, which makes the main mech look even more naked. I mean, there's literally just a naked body on top of the set. But something else you can do is take the back assemblies from the other two quad mechs and put it on, and I mean, I don't know, I wouldn't be showing this off if it literally wasn't an advertised feature. I also just want to point out that I think the escape pod also just looks kind of awful by itself. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the Surge and Rocket combat machine. Part of me really wants to put it in F tier because as like Hero Factory's grand finale hero set, it just feels like a slap in the face. But this thing's playability as well as pretty solid balance, I feel like is enough to at least warrant putting it in C tier. Now it's finally time to move on to the villains, and we'll start with Jawbeast. Now, Jawbeast is a cute little dinosaur with a very pretty color scheme. I really love black and purple together, and this little light blue and transparent blue looks really nice when paired with it. He's got these big jabbing talons that look pretty cool. I do have a couple pretty small issues with this set. The first one is an issue that all the beasts have, but there's nothing really stopping the head from looking hollow when you open up the mouth. Just kind of an unfortunate thing. Another very minor issue is I don't like the gray bones. I think they break up the color scheme, and honestly, this set would look much better if they were just swapped out with the regular black ones. Yeah, but I mean, overall, Jawbeast is just a dope little dinosaur with a very excellent color scheme. Part of me wants to throw it in S tier, but I'll go ahead and put it in A tier. So, next up we have Flyer Beast, who I do not like anywhere near as much as Jawbeast. Right, the wings suck. They look horrible. They literally just grabbed these wing assemblies from the old Batman set. Yeah, unless I wasn't told specifically that these were wings, I would not assume that these are wings because this is not how wings look. I do kind of like the scar on his eye. I think that looks pretty cool. I also like this antenna that he's holding. Kind of gives a sense of scale for how big these creatures are supposed to be. This big claw over here probably could have looked better if it was attached to an actual forearm instead of the elbow, because it just looks weird and really has a hard time moving. I'm also kind of disappointed that we didn't get an extra one of these for the other side of the leg. I think that probably would have looked much better. He's also got a platform on his back so Breeze can gag and ride him. Take that how you will. Yeah, I don't like this set. I think it's incredibly basic, with the only interesting things about it being very flawed. I don't really think it's bad enough to be an F tier set, but it's definitely below average, so we'll put it in C tier. For our final Wave 1 set, we have Splitter Beast. And when they're together, they actually look pretty cool. I like the way they look quite a bit. The colors look nice, although I do wish there was some more solid orange to make the orange head fit in a little more. He's got big claws, which is always a plus. He's got a big lamppost to wield as a weapon, so, you know, I'm a fan of that as well. You can mess with the small creature's arms and put him to whatever pose you'd like. I just kind of like him hugging on for dear life. Of course, the main gimmick of this set is, well, it's splitting, and yeah, these do not look anywhere near as good apart. The small one is just Jawbeast at home, and the big one is just another CCBS figure, except his head really stands out from the rest of his color scheme because, again, that's the only solid orange on the figure. If the set was cheaper, it would probably be an A tier set, honestly, but this is a $20 set, the same price as these sets. So this thing could sit down in B tier. We have another polybag to go over, and I'm gonna be honest, this is probably my favorite Invasion from Below set. I mean, it's simple, it's cute, it's got a very pretty color scheme. I like him quite a bit, and for the grand price of free, I'm putting him in S tier, baby. For the much lamer Wave 2 sets you gotta actually pay for, we'll go ahead and start with Tunneler Beast. He's got kind of this insectoid look with 4 ground legs that can balance pretty well. And then these arms that have these little pinching claws that for the most part I like, although I'm not a very big fan of this thumb. I mean, they're just better pieces that could have been used instead of this little spike. I also like his eyes, because they're just like blank white, kind of implies that he's blind, which, I mean, makes sense for a cave-dwelling creature, because, they don't see very well. I also like the use of this kind of cocoon piece on his back. I think it looks pretty nice. I think maybe it would have looked better in red, but you know what? It looks just fine in green. And yeah, that's pretty much it for Tunneler Beast. I think this is a pretty solid little $10 set. You can join Job Beast up in A tier. And finally, for our regular figures, we have Crystal Beast. Now, of course, the transparent blue looks pretty dope, and it's accented pretty well with the black and little hints of lime green. Unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of how the upper limbs look in gray, especially because those parts already exist in both black and green. His hands are pretty much the same as Tunneler Beast, except they use some smaller parts, so in my opinion they look a little better. He's got this big staff weapon, which I think is fine. Like, I'm not a big fan of like animals having actual hand weapons, but it looks good and it can grab onto the mini heroes like advertised, so no real complaints here. So yeah, Crystal Beast is a pretty cool set, A tier. And now, at long last, it's time for the grand finale. Queen Beast versus Stormer, Ferno, and Evo. Except I only have Evo here. So yeah, this is a 2-pack set, so I'll just go ahead and get Evo out of the way because this is the villain segment. I like this mech quite a bit. As a matter of fact, I would go as far as to say this is the best mech from Wave 2, which is not saying much. It's got 6 legs, big cannon up front, some lights on front. It's also the only one of the mechs in Wave 2 to have this pod, which is kind of strange. I don't know if that's completely intentional or they just didn't bother to change the design to make it more uniform. But overall, for a side build, it looks pretty good and I like it quite a bit. And it would probably be an A tier set if it was just sold by itself for like 15 bucks. But don't worry, because unlike the other 2-pack set, the other half of this set is also really good. I like the use of gold pretty much used exclusively on either the crown, the body armor, or the weapon, or her goatee, which, I mean, she can rock it, so I can't really be mad. She also weirdly has a lot of eyes. She's got these things on her back that I think are supposed to be wings like flare beasts, but they at least look good as ornaments, so I don't really care that they don't look like wings. The overall design of this figure is kind of centaur-like in a way, which, I mean, I think that's a pretty interesting and unique design to work with, so no real complaints here. Her weapon has the same kind of hero grabbing feature that Crystal Beast does, and it's also got the same hands. So overall, as a $35 bundle, I think this is a pretty decent high note to end both the tier list and the series on. Honestly, I think it's deserving of the S tier. And with that, it's finally over. Every Hero Factory set reviewed in one video. I hope you enjoyed. I just kind of had this idea for the video that I thought I could just very simply get out in like December, and then the more I thought about it, I was like, yo, I could like make this even better. So then it ballooned into the monstrosity you see in front of you today. Of course, I mean, saying I've been working on this since December might be a bit misleading because it's not like I've only focused on this. But during the production of this video, some real life stuff happened, and yeah, it's not stuff I want to just spew out on the internet, but that was also just like definitely contribute to slowing the progress of the video down. Alright, like, don't get me wrong, I definitely enjoy YouTube as a hobby that can get me a little extra cash, but I'm not gonna overstress myself for a bunch of YouTube videos. I just gotta take care of myself at some point. You know, if I start overdoing my hobbies to the point where I don't enjoy them, then what's even the point in having hobbies, you know? I am excited for future projects on this channel. I've got a couple making of videos that I have been waiting to start until after this video's out, so now I can finally get to that, as well as some more Hero Factory Zeta, and showing off some more mocks and updated revamps, because I teased that a long time ago, but, you know, life stuff. But yeah, I guess that's gonna do it for the video. So if you enjoyed, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for when more stuff comes out.